Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Sorry, Eleanora, but this is now my home too, boldly declared the mother-in-law, showing up with suitcases after the wedding. But the bride turned out to be smarter. Darling, wake up, said the husband affectionately, leaning over the bed and gently nudging his wife's shoulder. His wife immediately opened her eyes, rolled over onto her back, and stretched. Good morning, she said groggily, yawning. I feel like I didn't sleep at all. What time is it? It's already 8 a.m. Upon hearing the time, Eleanora was slightly disappointed. Today was a day off. She didn't need to get up early for work, where she had to show up every other day on a set schedule. Today was a good opportunity to sleep in, but for some reason, Domingo had woken her up. Can I sleep a bit more? She voiced her thoughts aloud. It's a bit early. I went to bed at 2 a.m. I'm so tired. She yawned again. We have a lot to do around the house today, Eleanora, her husband replied, contemplating as he looked up. We need to go to the store, stock up on groceries, tidy up the house, and then cook everything we buy. Is today some kind of holiday? Eleanora chuckled sleepily. I don't recall marking today in red on the calendar. Why do we need to cook anything when the fridge isn't exactly empty? That's what I wanted to tell you, Domingo shyly smiled and looked lovingly into his wife's eyes. I don't know if you'll be thrilled, but it's actually quite nice. What exactly? For some reason, her husband's words worried Eleanora, and her sleepiness instantly vanished. She sat up and leaned against the bed's headboard, ready to hear Domingo's news. My mother is coming tonight or tomorrow morning. The news didn't sound too alarming. Eleanora had known Domingo's mother, Senora Lavina, for several years already. They officially became relatives just over a week ago when she married her son. Her mother-in-law was a wonderful woman, always willing to help in any situation. Eleanora rarely asked her for anything, but when she did, Senora Lavina always tried to fulfill her requests without any objections. Why should I not like this news? She wondered. Well, she's coming, for a bit longer than usual. Maybe for 5 days or a week. I spoke with her yesterday, and she said she really wants to see our family life. You know, it could actually be a good thing in a way. She's a great homemaker and might give you a few expert tips. The news didn't sound too alarming. Eleanora had known Domingo's mother, Senora Lavina, for several years already. They had officially become relatives just over a week ago when she married her son. Her mother-in-law was an excellent woman who was always ready to help in any situation. Eleanora rarely asked her for anything, but when she did, Senora Lavina always tried to fulfill her requests without any objections. Why should I not like this news? She wondered. Well, she's coming, for a bit longer than usual. Maybe for 5 days or a week. I spoke with her yesterday, and she said she really wants to see our family life. You know, it could actually be a good thing in a way. She's a great homemaker and might give you a few expert tips. What kind of expert tips do I need, huh? Eleanora asked ironically. Am I a bad homemaker? Oh no, no dear, I didn't mean anything like that. Domingo quickly waved his hands. But she has a lot of experience with family life, and ours has just begun. So I think she might teach us a thing or two. Domingo's train of thought seemed odd to Eleanora, at the very least, but she didn't dwell on it. She respected her mother-in-law, so there was no reason to feel negatively about her visit. Sure, a week was quite a long time, but there shouldn't be any major issues aside from minor inconveniences. Well, maybe, Eleanora shrugged. I don't argue. But why cook? She's not coming for a feast, just visiting for a week. In any case, we'll still have plenty of time to eat together. Still, Domingo smiled. I think we should welcome her properly. Anyway, let's get up. He affectionately patted her leg and got out of bed, turning to leave the room. When do you plan to leave? His wife asked. Well, maybe in a couple of hours, but you know how it is with you. It usually takes twice as long for you to get ready. I don't get it, Eleanora mockingly protested. What's with all the complaints? Married life, dear, Domingo replied humorously, shrugging. Can't help it, you'll have to get used to it. I love him. I love him so much, Eleanora thought to herself, feeling like the happiest woman alive. Even though she hadn't gotten enough sleep today due to his whims, it seemed she hadn't made a mistake agreeing to marry this man. She lingered in bed for a few more minutes, dreaming of how she could have slept longer if not for her mother-in-law's arrival. However, postponing tasks was not an option. If her husband planned to welcome his mother with honors, it was probably best to agree with him and follow his plan. That way, his mother would likely have a more positive impression of their family life. She then got out of bed, took a shower, and quickly made herself an omelet and a cup of hot coffee for breakfast. The weather outside was perfect for spending the whole day indoors, but not at all suitable for any sort of outing. March had just begun. It was quite cold outside. The trees were still bare, the sky gloomy, and occasionally, fog settled over the city. It was present today as well, though not as thick as it had been, say, 2 weeks ago. Back then, Eleanora, while riding to work in a taxi, couldn't see anything beyond 5 meters ahead of her, and the car windows quickly fogged up. Ready? Domingo asked when Eleanora was finishing up getting herself ready before leaving the house. It's already almost 10. Wait another 15 minutes, she said, looking in the mirror and applying mascara. Yes, Domingo sighed. Just married life. I was ready to go when I woke you up. Well, excuse me, Eleanora shrugged, not distracted from her task. What can I do if I have to look nice? You look beautiful without all that, and it's just a waste of time. I look good too, but I don't bother with makeup. Smiling, Eleanora glanced at her husband. I made the right choice, she thought again, and her smile grew. She didn't deceive. 15 minutes later, she assured Domingo that she was ready to go. They left their apartment on the 17th floor of a prestigious new building, got into the car parked in front of the house, and headed to the shopping center for groceries. Domingo planned to buy a lot to really impress his mother when she arrived. Eleanora didn't object, though she still believed they could have welcomed his mother without such a feast. There were already quite a few different dishes on the table that Domingo wanted to greet his mother with, 2 1.5-liter bottles of lemonade under the table, and a bottle of good champagne that the man also bought for the arrival of Senora Lavina. Eleanora helped him organize this table. So, everything seems ready, Domingo said, placing the last plate of sliced bread on the table. I think we'll have enough. And what if it's not enough? Eleanora asked in surprise. Honestly, I'm starting to get the impression that your mom isn't coming alone, but also bringing all her neighbors along to see how we live and help us eat all this. Domingo chuckled. No big deal, we'll eat it all anyway. He looked lovingly into his wife's eyes. She loved that look and in such moments once again convinced herself that she sincerely loved this man. Her happiness knew no bounds when she married him, but in such moments, those limits broke, and the level of joy somewhere in her soul began to skyrocket. Okay, he looked at the wall clock. We need to call her to find out exactly when she's coming. If it's tonight as we agreed, then all is well. Something suddenly clicked in Eleanora's mind. She remembered the morning conversation where her husband mentioned that Senora Lavina was supposed to arrive either tonight or tomorrow morning. But if she's arriving tomorrow morning, what's the point of setting the table now? All these delicacies will have to be put back in the fridge anyway. And our house cat, Gree, who's currently hiding somewhere in the apartment, could easily jump onto the table without asking and eat all the sausage while no one's watching. Hold on, Eleanora puzzledly interjected as Domingo reached into his pocket for his phone. You said she might come tomorrow morning. Why did we set all this up now? I totally forgot about that. Well, I think she might still come today, he replied, frowning. It depends on whether she manages to buy a train ticket before they're all sold out, but I doubt she'd waste any time. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, unlocked it, and dialed a number. For a couple of seconds, Domingo and Eleanora stood in silence, both listening to the ringing from the receiver. Eleanora silently prayed that her mother-in-law would still arrive today, sparing them from having to urgently find space in the fridge to hide everything they had prepared. "Hello, Mom, hi," Domingo finally exclaimed joyfully. "Are you coming? Did you manage to buy the ticket? Oh, so you're already here?" The woman was surprised to hear her son's reaction. Her mother-in-law was true to herself and always tried to do everything in advance. "Okay, then we'll wait for you," Eleanora's husband reflexively nodded, then hung up a few seconds later. "She's already in town, right?" "Yes," Domingo confirmed. "She said she just got off the train and is looking for a taxi. I think she'll be here in about an hour and a half. Good thing we won't have to put everything away. The main thing is to make sure greed doesn't swipe the sausage." Eleanora looked hopefully at the table. "Well, that's half the battle." "Yeah," Domingo agreed. Together, they decided to relax after a long day spent in the kitchen and cleaning up, watching a movie together on TV. Time flew by quickly. It felt like only 20 minutes had passed, though the clock was nearing 6 p.m., and they had started relaxing just over an hour ago. Glancing at the time, Domingo abruptly rose from the couch and hurried to grab his phone from the nightstand at the other end of the living room. "What's wrong?" Eleanora asked in surprise, then understood when she checked the time. "We need to call Mom. If she's arriving now, we need to get ready." He picked up the phone and dialed Senora Lavina's number again. "Hi, Mom, where are you?" "Oh, you're already pulling up. Mom, could you have at least called? We've been sitting here on pins and needles waiting for your call." "All right, we're coming out to meet you." "What's going on?" Eleanora asked when Domingo pocketed his phone. "Do we need to go out already?" "Yes." "Yeah," he sighed. "Mom forgot to call again. We need to meet her because she'll have 2 heavy suitcases. Can't the elevator help with that?" Eleanora asked ironically. "Well, at least we can help unload the suitcases from the car. You know my mom, despite being lively, she's getting older. She still needs help, so let's get dressed and go meet her." At that moment, Eleanora thought that any other woman in her place would probably be tired already. Her mother-in-law hadn't even arrived yet, and she and Domingo had already done so much. Yet, there was a whole week of living together with Senora Lavina ahead of them. She was surprised that she had taken it all quite calmly until now. Apparently, marrying Domingo and taking his proud surname, Valena, had prepared her for such situations. They got dressed and left the apartment. Taking the elevator down and stepping outside, they silently waited in the courtyard, their car's headlights piercing through the evening March darkness. They had to wait for this moment for a good 15 minutes, and Eleanora managed to get quite chilled during that time. She kept hoping she wouldn't catch a cold from this cold wait. Otherwise, back in the apartment awaited a first aid kit with tasteless antiviral medications, antibiotics, and other pills. "Did we prepare the bedding for Mom?" Domingo suddenly asked, fear in his eyes. "She won't sleep on the couch without bedding, I know her." "I think we had a spare set," Eleanora pondered. "If not, I'll check when we get back." 15 minutes after they left the house, the taxi finally pulled into the courtyard. Domingo's heart raced with excitement. He was much more anxious than his wife, who didn't quite understand all the fuss surrounding her mother-in-law's arrival. The car stopped right in front of the steps leading to the entrance, and Senora Lavina slowly emerged from it. "Hello," she waved her hand. "Son, help me unload the things." Domingo immediately rushed forward, and Eleanora followed him leisurely. The man helped unload the suitcases from the trunk, and together the 3 of them climbed the steps and entered the building. The dinner with Senora Lavina had been going on for almost 2 hours. All 3 had already eaten their fill. Almost untouched on all the plates of dishes they had prepared was just one plate of cheesy baked sweet potatoes, which Senora Lavina criticized slightly, saying it was too salty. Upon hearing this, Eleanora smiled slyly because it was her husband who had prepared that dish, not her. Son, do you remember the last time I told you about Aunt Corona? Senora Lavina asked, placing her fork on the napkin. What about Aunt Corona? Domingo frowned in surprise, recalling their last conversation about this woman. I remember you said her legs were really bad and she could barely walk out of her apartment. Yeah, his mother-in-law nodded sadly. It's gotten worse for her now. Son, you should see what's happening with her legs. Oh. She theatrically clutched her heart. It's just terrible, son. All her veins are swollen, she can barely walk, her son even bought her a cane, but it's still tough for her with it. Poor Aunt Corona, Domingo sighed, finishing the remains of the vegetable salad on his plate. You know, whenever I hear about how bad she's doing, well, when you tell me about it, it makes me feel so sad. I remember her when she was young and beautiful. Well, not that young anymore, of course, but beautiful, yes. You probably don't remember, but I do, how she used to play hide and seek with you and Fabio in our courtyard. You were so little then, maybe about 3 years old, and her son Fabio was a bit older than you. Yeah, Domingo nodded. He's 2 or 3 years older. Eleanora listened quietly to their conversation. Despite talking about the poor health of a woman she had only just heard of, and how it was getting worse and worse for her, she found the conversation somewhat touching. She couldn't remember the last time she sat like this with her own mother, who lived on the other side of the country. She would have liked to sit with her parents at the kitchen table, discussing old acquaintances or just talking about life. It seemed like something she missed. Her parents had come for their wedding, but they couldn't stay long. They lived in a village, taking care of their livestock, which needed constant attention. They had no one to ask to look after the animals, so they left the day after the wedding. Imagine, son. Oh, to be honest, it's even awkward to talk about, Senora Lavina said, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. Remember Senor Tobias? Of course, I remember, Domingo chuckled. Who wouldn't? Ask any boy from our neighborhood, and they'll all remember him. He's the one who taught us to shoot at crows with a slingshot. I still remember him giving me rides in his old car. He was a really good man. There you go, his mother-in-law continued. It's good that you remember. Imagine, son, he seems to have taken a liking to me. Domingo was very surprised to hear this news and looked at his mother with wide eyes. Eleanora was also quite interested in this news, though she tried not to show it. What do you mean? Domingo asked, surprised. What do you mean by taking a liking to you? Oh, if only I knew myself. I mean, I couldn't care less about it, but it's quite flattering, son. His car is still in working condition, even if it's running mostly on his thoughts and prayers, I think. He invited me for a ride, invited me to dinner, and recently even gave me flowers. I was sitting on a bench in our courtyard, and there he comes on his car, looking very smart in a suit, and he pulls out a bouquet of roses from behind his back and gives it to me. Mom, how old is he? Domingo protested. Is he all right in the head? Or maybe he's got old age dementia creeping into his brain. I don't know, son, Senora Lavina shook her head. I don't pay any mind to his antics, but deep down, it's still nice to know I'm not so old that no one cares about me anymore. At least someone still does. Eleanora understood why her husband was so upset about this. 8 years ago, his mother had buried Domingo's father. It couldn't be said that he loved his parent. In the last years of his life, he had stopped caring for himself, took to drink, and behaved erratically. Nevertheless, Domingo warmly remembered his father and the childhood they had shared, which always made him feel happy when he thought about it. Now, hearing the news that someone else was vying for his mother's attention stirred a jealous feeling inside him. I respect Senor Tobias, of course, Domingo said, slightly annoyed, taking a sip of lemonade. But I think he's sticking his nose where it shouldn't be. Don't let it bother you, son, his mother waved her hand. I don't pay any attention to it anyway. Let the old buzzard keep trying. She chuckled. And who is this Senor Tobias? Eleanora finally interjected. He's our neighbor in the building, Senora Lavina replied. A wonderful man. Hasn't Domingo told you about him? Well, now you've heard it all yourself. He taught the boys in the neighborhood how to shoot crows with slingshots, gave Domingo and a few other boys rides in his car, and sometimes let them sit behind the wheel. I remember he used to buy ice cream for the kids too. Doesn't he have a wife? No. He buried his wife back in '98. The whole neighborhood mourned her. Bonita was such a good woman. But she didn't escape a heart attack. She had heart problems all her life, hypertension, ischemia, and so much more. Senora Lavina fell silent. It was clear she found talking about this unpleasant, so Eleanora felt a bit embarrassed for bringing up the topic. Well, okay, Senora Lavina finally said. Let's not dwell on the negative. Tobias doesn't stand a chance anyway. I'm not at the age to look for a life companion. Although, if he were more persistent, I might have considered it. She said the last sentence with a playful tone, trying to provoke her son positively, who seemed to have lost his mood after hearing this news. Wow, it's already 8:30, exclaimed the elderly woman, glancing at the clock. I need to be in bed by 10. I've only just gotten back into my routine, so, kids, will you make my bed? Yes? About 20 minutes later, the sofa in the living room was made up, and Eleanora was busy looking for the spare set of bed linens. She distinctly remembered it was somewhere, but she couldn't seem to find it. They rarely used it, as they had other sets for changing their own bed linens. Where could it be? Eleanora muttered to herself, rummaging through the living room closet. I remember it was here somewhere. Can't you find it? Domingo suddenly asked, approaching from the side. Maybe we should just use ours then? We have a few more sets anyway. If we need to change it, we'll have plenty. We have 4 sets, I think, right? 4, his wife confirmed. Okay, let's make up our bed then, but I'll look for that one tomorrow. It couldn't have just disappeared. While Senora Lavina applied some skin cream before bed, Domingo and Eleanora prepared the sofa for her. It was quite comfortable, soft, and when unfolded, it was as spacious as a double bed. His mother would surely find it comfortable and familiar to sleep on. At her own home, in her apartment, she also had a small double bed. Here, Mom, you can lie down, Domingo said as his mother entered the living room. We've got everything ready for you. Thank you, kids, the woman nodded. I'll get used to sleeping like this. I hope it won't take long to get used to. For some reason, this statement echoed in Eleanora's mind. What does she mean, won't take long, she suddenly thought, feeling a surge of indignation inside. It was the first time that day she felt this way toward her mother-in-law. Why do you think it will take long? Eleanora asked, smiling nervously. You're only here for a week, right? Isn't that so? For a week? Senora Lavina asked in surprise, glancing at her son. Did Domingo tell you I'm only here for a week? Domingo stood nearby, head down and hands behind his back, looking like a guilty schoolboy in the principal's office. And are you planning to stay longer? Of course, exclaimed his mother. I'm here for the long haul. But Eleanora, don't worry, I won't interfere in any way. Just observing your family affairs, that's all. At that moment, Eleanora's inattention and indignation seemed to reach their peak. She frowned and looked at Senora Lavina suspiciously, then asked, Why do you want to observe our family affairs? Well, why not? The elderly woman retorted. What if you can't manage something? I could be a big help as an assistant. I worry about my son and his well-being. I want everything to work out well for you and for you to have a good family life. So Eleanora, get used to my presence, but I've already said I won't interfere. Who does she think she is? Eleanora thought, her irritation intensifying even more. It seemed her mother-in-law was irritating her like never before. Indeed, it was quite audacious of her. Eleanora glanced at Domingo, who still stood there, rubbing the floor with his big toe, hands behind his back, guiltily looking down. Right now, she felt nothing but negative emotions towards him too. Why hadn't he told her straight away? Why hadn't he thought to consult with her too? She would address this with him later. But didn't you consider that even if you don't intend to interfere, your presence in our home will eventually become, well, unnecessary? Eleanora said indignantly. In your home? Actually, it's my home now too. My son lives here, and I don't want anything to go wrong for him. Think of me as your family therapist, Senora Lavina replied. Eleanora understood that if this conversation continued now, it could lead to a scandal. She also realized that she was currently not in a position of strength. If she said anything wrong about her mother-in-law, who seemed to suddenly feel like the mistress of their apartment and family, her husband would definitely take her side. At the very least, this was indicated by his silence now. A family therapist, you say, Eleanora muttered bitterly to herself. Fine, okay, be our family therapist. Senora Lavina looked at her future daughter-in-law, and in that moment, Eleanora realized that her mother-in-law held her in very unfavorable regard. If she had a good opinion of her, she wouldn't have planned to stay here at all. It meant she was worried that Eleanora might not treat her son right. All that previous kindness towards her was a masquerade. Now, it felt like the older woman looked down on her. Well then, splendid, the elderly woman exclaimed, then turned to Domingo. Son, why are you silent? Maybe you're not happy about me moving in? Moving in, Eleanora echoed scornfully in her mind. No, Mom, Domingo answered quietly. It's actually good, Eleanora just hasn't realized it yet, probably. There you go, she pointed her finger, look at Eleanora and listen, Domingo is speaking. Besides, I'll repeat it once more, I won't interfere, I'll just live nearby, so to speak, and keep an eye out. The night turned out to be sleepless. Eleanora tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. She had accumulated so many emotions throughout the evening, and she wanted to vent them somewhere. She could have discussed this with Domingo when they went to bed, but her husband deliberately left the bedroom door open. If they talked about anything, Senora Lavina would definitely hear it, so they lay in silence, discussing nothing. Eleanora didn't know what to do next. From this conversation, she understood that her relationship with her mother-in-law was very strained. She had thought they got along well, but now she realized it was all a lie, or rather, that her mother-in-law didn't think well of her at all. She really didn't want to openly disrespect the elderly woman. It would immediately ruin her relationship with her once and for all. Besides, Domingo would side with his mother again. Eleanora was convinced of this for some reason. Furthermore, as a woman, she could empathize with her mother-in-law. After all, she was quite lonely, she had no husband, and her only son now lived with his wife in another city. It was as if the move was the only thing that could somewhat brighten her lonely pensioner's life. But Eleanora, understanding Senora Lavina's perspective, wasn't inclined to sympathize, especially given the elderly woman's current brazen behavior. She needed to somehow quietly resolve this situation without a scandal or argument, and she needed to figure out how to do it as quickly as possible. The entire following day, Eleanora felt very uneasy. Tension and irritation hung in the air throughout the apartment. It was difficult to interact normally with her mother-in-law, and even with her husband. Both women tried to pretend that nothing had happened yesterday and that everything was normal now, but they still kept their distance from each other. It was Eleanora's second day off, and she had hoped to get a good rest today at least, but it didn't happen. Grease started digging around her feet, disturbing her sleep, and the sounds from the television, which someone had turned on at full volume, pierced through her dreams and dragged her out of them. But the tipping point, after which Eleanora couldn't sleep anymore, was Senora Lavina's loud conversation with someone. It definitely wasn't her husband, his voice wasn't heard at all. Most likely, her mother-in-law was talking to someone on the phone. Hearing the very loud and ringing voice of the pensioner, Eleanora woke up almost immediately and couldn't fall back asleep. Sleepily opening her eyes, she reached for the phone on the bedside table. Checking the time, she realized she had woken up even earlier today than when her husband had awakened her yesterday. Only 7:30. Why isn't she asleep at such an early hour? Eleanora thought irritably and again tried to close her eyes and sleep, but her mother-in-law didn't think to lower her voice. Felisa, don't even think about buying them, Senora Lavina's voice echoed from the living room. Those dahlias will bring you so much trouble. Don't even think about it. Felisa, listen to me. If you want to plant flowers in your garden, go for roses instead. Yes, red ones. What on earth do roses have to do with it? Eleanora muttered to herself, trying to cover her head with a pillow to drown out the horribly loud and ringing voice of her mother-in-law. However, it penetrated even through the tightly pressed pillow to her ears, seeming to irritate Eleanora even more. No, something definitely needs to be done about this, she thought, and pulled the pillow off her head. She got out of bed, went into the living room, and nodded in greeting to Senora Lavina, who was talking on the phone, sitting on the couch in front of the television. Eleanora was even a bit puzzled not to see Domingo next to her. For some reason, she thought he would be there, patiently ignoring her loud conversation. She walked into the bathroom, washed her face, brushed her teeth, then went to the kitchen to see what was left after last night for breakfast. Now she thought Domingo might be there, but he wasn't in the kitchen either. She really didn't want to disturb her mother-in-law to ask where her husband was, nor did she want to have any contact with her at all. He couldn't have gone anywhere this early, Eleanora whispered to herself as she confirmed that Domingo wasn't in the kitchen either. She then glanced at the balcony door leading from the kitchen and saw her husband sitting there on a stool, gazing mysteriously into the distance at the gray March cityscape. Thick fog lingered in the distance, visible even through the window. Returning to the bedroom and throwing on her robe, Eleanora stepped out onto the balcony to join her husband. "Good morning," she said groggily. "What are you doing out here?" Thinking, Domingo replied tensely, still focused on observing the neighborhood slowly coming to life after the night. "And why did you get up so early? It's your day off. You wanted to sleep in." "Your mother woke me up," Eleanora grumbled unhappily. "She talks so loudly on the phone that I think even the neighbors on the first floor have woken up because of it." "Lovely," Domingo exclaimed and slapped his legs with his hands. "So now you're openly complaining? Huh? And what, Eleanora, is wrong specifically with my mom?" The woman hadn't expected such a reaction from her husband. She had hoped he would laugh it off, but he wasn't in the mood for laughter at all. Clearly, he was deeply troubled by the whole situation, and he too was filled with negative emotions. "What?" Eleanora asked, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "What I mean, dear, is that I don't understand what exactly is bothering you. Why were you so upset with my mom yesterday?" "Huh? What's wrong with her staying with us for a little while?" "I was upset primarily with you, Domingo," Eleanora exclaimed. "Why didn't you tell me right away that your mom was planning to live with us, not just come to visit for a week? And anyway, don't forget that we are already a family, and decisions like this should be made together. What if I decide to move my parents in with us? Will that be okay with you?" "Listen here," Domingo shouted, jumping up from the chair. "I don't want to argue with you, but apparently, there's no other way. Having my mom live with us is a big plus for both of us. Firstly, we'll always have something to eat at home. Secondly, our place will always be clean. Thirdly, we'll always have her watching over us. Are you okay with living under her watch at the age of 30, Domingo?" Eleanora asked incredulously. "Are you planning to grow up at all? And about cleaning and cooking, if anything, you have a wife who was already planning to take care of all that. And why on earth do we need your mom in the apartment, planning to live with us? Domingo, understand, this is not normal." "Reacting like this is what's not normal," Domingo exclaimed, waving his hands around. "I still don't understand what exactly you don't like about it. You know, Eleanora, I see another plus in this. Maybe you'll finally learn to behave properly towards her. Perhaps you'll even find some common ground." We had common ground until yesterday, Eleanora shouted, and everything was fine, and everyone was happy. But now, Domingo, I don't know how to trust her, and I don't know how to trust you either. She returned to the kitchen in a state of emotional turmoil, slamming the balcony door loudly behind her. Domingo remained seated on the stool, gazing tensely into the distance at the beautiful morning view of the city, shrouded in fog in the distance. Eleanora's indignation knew no bounds. Though she had expected her husband to side with his mother, she never anticipated being completely disregarded by him. It was hard for her to believe that such a beautiful family harmony could shatter in an instant with the snap of a finger. Without bothering to have breakfast, she returned to the bedroom, closed the door, and lay back down in bed. She needed to carefully consider what was happening, draw the right conclusions, and find a solution to this problem. To her immense regret, she found herself playing alone against her husband and his mother. "Come on, Mom, what should I do?" Eleanora felt cold in the park. A chilly wind blew, making it difficult to breathe. She had purposely left the apartment under the pretext of needing to go to the store, not specifying where or why she was going. It seemed to her that no one cared at all. Of course, she didn't need to go anywhere. She just wanted one thing, to rid herself of the tension that had settled in their apartment. She wanted to leave home as quickly as possible and stay away for as long as possible because she now felt uncomfortable there. She felt like a stranger, unwanted by everyone. She went to the park and sat down on a bench. She didn't know what to do next. The only idea that came to mind was to go to her parents at the other end of the country as a protest, but she strongly doubted that would help. Most likely, her mother-in-law had well washed her son's brain in such a short period of time, and now he considered her somehow wrong. Out of despair, she called her mother. Senora Marissa was a very smart and resourceful woman, and Eleanora thought her mother was the only person in her situation who could really help her properly and come up with some good ideas. "Well," Senora Marissa pondered. "Daughter, I don't even know. You understand, this is a very difficult, delicate issue. I understand that it's very hard. Look, Antonio, your father, wasn't the friendliest mom either, and I also remember very well how she came to us, and then I was tormented for a whole 2 weeks. You see, all pensioners are bored with pensions. They want to be closer to their children. I understand that, Mom. But it can't stay like this," exclaimed Eleanora. "I didn't want to live with her in the same apartment. I honestly didn't expect such news, and of course, my mood deteriorated immediately. It was mostly spoiled because Domingo didn't tell me anything on time and didn't discuss this with me, and then I noticed that he was on her side. And she even looked at me like that. Mom, I'm sure she doesn't really like me." "Daughter, I understand all of this," Senora Marissa reassured her. What are you saying?" Eleanora didn't immediately realize that her father, Antonio, had distracted her mother from the phone conversation. Most likely, he had something to add to this topic. "Your father reminded me," said Eleanora's mother after a few seconds. "I noticed that too, but Antonio paid close attention to it. We didn't like her much either. When we were at your wedding, we heard what she was talking about with her friends. There was this Felisa who couldn't keep her mouth shut, and Blanca too. In general, they were sitting next to us, and we heard them discussing you." "Really? What did they say?" "Well, Blanca was indignant, saying why her son chose you specifically to marry. Supposedly, you're not the type of girl that would suit her boy, and she herself thinks you're somehow not right, like you don't match. Her son, you see, is an entrepreneur, has his own electronics store, and you're just some village girl." "Exactly." Eleanora heard her father's loud exclamation, who, apparently, was nearby Senora Marissa. "See, even Dad agrees," Mother said. "You see, daughter, this is a very difficult situation. I understand that by itself, Domingo is not a bad guy, and everything was going well between you, but I see that the problem lies with her. She's washing his brains there, saying that you're not a good match for each other, and you know, I'm starting to think that's why she came. To get rid of me?" "Yes?" Well, yes, surprisingly calmly said Senora Marissa. Mom, but I have to do something to stop all this. Eleanora exclaimed. I understand that Domingo is not bad, and we just got married. But she creates such problems that I don't even know. You need to send her back home under some pretext, her mother reasoned, because otherwise you won't get rid of her any other way. If you make a scene, it will automatically sever relations with her and with your Domingo. If you go away yourself, it will be the same, just that severing will last a little longer. Well, how can I send her back? She won't agree for anything. Think about what reasons she might have to return home. Maybe she forgot something there or someone is waiting for her. Maybe she has urgent business there. Understand, daughter, you need to act very carefully here. You've gotten yourself into a very complicated situation from which you definitely need to find a way out. Mom, how did you get out of such a situation? Did you feel the same way when Grandma came to you? Well, thank God your grandmother came only for 2 weeks, and here, as I understand it, the situation is much more serious. The wind was getting colder. Eleanora regretted not checking the weather forecast this morning because now it seemed that snow would start any moment and the cold wind would blow even stronger. Even in her warm winter jacket and a well-insulated hat, she felt the cold. Okay, Mom, thank you so much, Eleanora sighed. I'll try to figure something out. Maybe I'll also consult with my friends. Yes, you can consult with them, but remember, if you want to preserve your family and avoid a big scandal, you have to proceed very carefully. They talked for a few more minutes, exchanged questions about how everyone was doing. Eleanora asked about her parents' well-being and also inquired about their old dog Lucas, who should have turned 13 this year. Lucas was doing well, although showing signs of aging and having difficulty moving around. Nevertheless, Senora Marissa assured her that the dog still had plenty of life left in him and wasn't planning on leaving them anytime soon. Hearing this pleasant news, Eleanora said goodbye to her mom, promising to call in the evening. Her mother's advice turned out to be truly valuable. Now she needed to figure out how to make it all happen in reality. Eleanora began thinking about what could convince her mother-in-law to return home to their small neighboring town. Eleanora wasn't wrong. The wind blew even stronger, prompting her to hurry out of the park and find a warmer place. She didn't want to return to the apartment, so she decided to stop by a cafe and contemplate a solution to her problem there, sipping hot coffee. Throughout the entire walk, she couldn't come up with any worthwhile solution to her problem. Immediately after leaving the cafe, Eleanora was forced to return to the apartment and buy something on her way to maintain her pretense of going to the store. She bought toothpaste, even though there was already plenty at home. Just yesterday, when she and her husband went shopping at the mall, he bought a tube. Upon returning to the apartment, she instantly felt the tension and irritation come back. The TV was blaring loudly. Apparently, Senora Lavina was having hearing problems and was still talking loudly on the phone with her elderly friend. From the moment she stepped into her own apartment, Eleanora began to lose the mood that had somewhat returned during her city walk. "Where have you been?" Domingo asked, coming out into the hallway when he heard his wife return home. "I was worried, Eleanora." "Worried?" she asked mockingly in her voice as she took off her shoes. "I find that hard to believe, honestly. If you were worried, you would have at least called me. And you could have asked me where I was going before I left." "I was busy," the man said sternly. "I just didn't notice you leaving. You disappeared so quickly that even my mom didn't notice, although she's very sensitive to door slams." "Well, I didn't slam the door," Eleanora mocked and walked past her husband without paying him any attention. Her mother-in-law sat in the same position on the couch, holding the phone to her ear, loudly explaining something to her friend Felisa. Eleanora cherished peace and quiet, especially in her own apartment, which ideally should have served as her place of relaxation. But now, anywhere but her apartment seemed like a place of rest. It felt unbearable. She had no choice but to silently walk into the bedroom and close the door behind her. Once the door was closed, the noise subsided, although her mother-in-law's voice could still be heard. What the hell is the point of cleaning and cooking at home? Eleanora exclaimed aloud. Why bother looking after me and Domingo if she does nothing but sit on the couch with the TV blaring? Only now did Eleanora realize the hopeless situation she was in. She didn't know what decision to make because any of them would likely lead to a scandal, and she didn't want that. Not only did she feel sorry for herself and her husband, but also for the potential happiness and well-being of their family. And, in a purely feminine way, she even felt sorry for Senora Lavina herself. Yes, she didn't like her future daughter-in-law and perhaps was trying to protect her son from her. But if she had something else to occupy her besides looking after her 30-year-old adult son, she probably wouldn't attach such importance to it. There would be something to occupy her. Eleanora seized on that thought, and it even seemed to her that she had found the key to salvation. But what could she occupy herself with only in her hometown, at home? It seemed that if she could find the right answer to this question, the plan could be implemented. First, she needed to find that occupation, and then arrange everything so that her mother-in-law would leave their apartment on her own. Eleanora lay down on the bed and began to think hard about what could compel the pensioner to return home and completely forget about her son, her daughter-in-law, and their family life. Exactly. Eleanora jumped up from the bed, feeling a surge of energy and adrenaline. The only thing that can distract her from caring for her son and his family life is her own family life. Immediately, Eleanora remembered how yesterday during dinner Senora Lavina had mentioned how a neighbor, Senor Tobias, had started paying attention to her. Eleanora had noticed then that her mother-in-law's eyes sparkled when she talked about him, though she spoke with some annoyance. Perhaps she realized that nothing would come of it due to their advanced age, but in her heart, she wanted it. Somehow, she needed to prompt Tobias to take more serious steps. What could he do that would prompt his so-called beloved to leave immediately and go back home to meet him? Eleanora actively recalled what she had heard from Senora Lavina yesterday during dinner. That the man gave her flowers, offered to take her for a ride in his barely working car, that he was very well dressed. If only he were more persistent, maybe I would consider. She immediately remembered the phrase her mother-in-law had said, jokingly but with a hint of seriousness behind it. How do I get in touch with this Senor Tobias? Eleanora muttered to herself. I need to do something to make him act more decisively, something that will make her go to him without thinking twice. She sat down on the bed and continued to actively think about what he could do. Invite her to the movies? No, that's silly. Even if she agrees, she'll just come back to her son's apartment right after the cinema. Maybe invite her on a date? No, that's the same thing. And then a thought dawned on Eleanora. It seemed to her that the idea was really worth considering. And if she organized everything correctly, it could even be very well executed. Senor Tobias had to come here to town in his barely working car to take Senora Lavina away from here. It seemed that with this plan, she would kill two birds with one stone. Not only would it be the most persistent action from a man, but he would also take her away from here himself. It was brilliant. Now she just needed to figure out how to contact this Senor Tobias, whom she had never met before and had only heard about for the first time yesterday. Eleanora was convinced that Tobias' number must be in Senora Lavina's phone book. But how could she do it if her mother-in-law always kept her phone with her and spent most of her time chatting with friends? No, exclaimed Eleanora, sooner or later she'll leave her phone unattended, and that's when I must seize the opportunity. That evening, Eleanora had the chance to take Senora Lavina's phone. She couldn't believe such a stroke of luck, as if fate itself was arranging everything just as Eleanora had planned. She had to spend the entire day next to Senora Lavina, monitoring the location of her phone every second. Most of the time, the pensioner chatted with her friends, and this could go on for hours. Eleanora was even a bit surprised at how much money Senora Lavina had on her phone. The rest of the time, Senora Lavina watched TV and regularly turned up the volume. It annoyed Eleanora greatly, but she had to endure it and not show any signs of impatience. In the evening, Domingo suggested dinner for both ladies. Eleanora could see that her husband was very tense and irritated, and she understood that his irritation was caused by her. She felt very uncomfortable about it, and in her heart, she felt offended by her husband's behavior, but she still believed that it was her mother-in-law who imposed such an attitude on him. Eleanora declined dinner because she knew that sitting at the table with all three of them would make her even more awkward and unpleasant. However, Senora Lavina kindly agreed and immediately got up from the couch and went to the kitchen with her son. It was only after 2 or 3 minutes that Eleanora realized Senora Lavina had left her phone on the sofa armrest. It was a perfect opportunity to get the phone number of this mysterious charmer Senor Tobias, contact him, and ask him to come and take Lavina away. Realizing that the phone was unattended, Eleanora silently prayed that it was not locked with a password. She discreetly moved to the spot on the couch where the pensioner had just been sitting and took the phone. There was no lock on it, and she was able to calmly access all the information. Really, what kind of password could the old lady have on her phone? Eleanora thought ironically as she quickly navigated to Senora Lavina's contact list. There were insanely many numbers here. Apparently, Senora Lavina recorded every number that came into her hands. An old habit of keeping everything that could possibly be saved, just in case, even if such a case never arose in her life. Eleanora decided to search for Senor Tobias' number using keywords. She typed in the first 3 letters of the man's name, and immediately several numbers with the name Tobias appeared. Tobias Windows, no, not this one, Eleanora thought to herself, scrolling through the contacts with that name, Tobias order tomatoes. What is this even? What tomatoes? Okay. Tobias Madrid, no, definitely not him. Tobias neighbor. Ah. Now this seems more like it. She photographed Senora Lavina's phone screen with her own phone where she had found Tobias' number displayed. Then she continued to search through the contacts list for any numbers that Senora Lavina might have saved under her admirer's name. There were no more such numbers, and Eleanora realized that she had likely found the right one. Quickly turning off the pensioner's phone, she placed it back where she had taken it from and returned to her place on the couch. Now she needed to find a way to discreetly call this neighbor Tobias and ensure Senora Lavina wouldn't find out or overhear anything. Walking again would have been a great option, but it was very cold outside, and Eleanora didn't want to leave the warm, albeit now less cozy, apartment. So, she decided that hiding in the bedroom and calling the man from there would be the best course of action. That's exactly what she did. While her husband and mother-in-law were having dinner in the kitchen, Eleanora walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. Immediately entering the gallery on her phone, she copied Tobias' number from the photo and dialed it. The phone rang. Eleanora was very nervous. Hello, the ringing stopped abruptly, and Eleanora heard a hoarse male voice. Hello, please don't hang up, Eleanor spoke softly. Who are you? Do I know you? The man wondered. No, you probably don't know me. At least, you weren't at our wedding. Anyway, that's not very important. You definitely know who Senora Lavina is, right? Lavina, the man was surprised and cleared his throat slightly. Of course, I know her. She's my neighbor. What happened to her? And who are you? I'm her fiancé. Well, sort of. I have information that you, let's say, have a soft spot for her. At least, that's what Senora Lavina herself says. Really? The admirer exclaimed joyfully. So, what does she say exactly? She says she notices your affection. I don't know if she's lying, but she thinks nothing could come of it with you. Damn, the man exclaimed, and Eleanora could hear the disappointment in his voice. So, why are you calling me to tell me this? Well, yes and no, not exactly. Besides, Senora Lavina said that maybe something could have happened if you were more persistent. And what does that mean? It means you're moving in the right direction, but the attention you're showing her isn't enough. You need to pay her more attention, show more of your affection. Do you understand? Well, Tobias sounded intrigued. All right. So, what should I do? Should I come to her right now? Maybe bring her something? She's not at home right now, Eleanora whispered, glancing towards the bedroom door. But I have an idea that could really help you. I think after this, she'll definitely take notice of you, and maybe something could work out. What's the idea? Look, she's here with Domingo. You know where Domingo lives, right? So, she came to us, and I'm really worried about my mother-in-law's personal state, and I was so moved when I heard about you. Eleanora clearly bluffed, but it helped her sound more convincing to Tobias. Anyway, I've come up with the perfect way for you to catch her attention. You have a car, right? Yes. Take your car and drive to the city immediately. I'll give you the address as soon as you arrive. You know how romantic this will be? I assure you, she'll melt. Right now? Tobias asked, and Eleanora could hear from his tone that he was ready. Yes, preferably right now. She definitely won't be expecting this, and it'll be very romantic. It seemed like Eleanora had succeeded. Now all she had to do was wait for Tobias' call. He was supposed to call when he entered the city. Eleanora was a bit worried that her mother-in-law might refuse to go back with Tobias. Nevertheless, that was the least likely scenario. Remembering how she had talked about this man just yesterday at dinner, Eleanora, despite some minor doubts, still believed that her mother-in-law wouldn't refuse. She returned to the living room. Senora Lavina was back in her usual spot on the couch. The phone lay where Eleanora had left it, and her mother-in-law was engrossed in some melodrama on the TV. I wonder why she cares whether she watches this much here or at home, Eleanora thought disdainfully, watching the pensioner stare at the screen. And where is Domingo? The young woman asked. Domingo is on the balcony, yours, the elderly woman snapped angrily without looking away from the TV. At that moment, Eleanora realized that she had done everything right. With such an attitude towards her, she wouldn't be able to live in this apartment for another week, let alone her whole life, and there would certainly be a divorce with her husband. Eleanora doubted he would rethink anything while his caring mother was nearby. Now all she had to do was wait for Tobias' call. If everything went as planned, this would be the best day of her marriage to Domingo so far. She went out onto the balcony. Her mood was excellent, and there was absolutely no tension in the air inside the apartment right now. Domingo sat here on a chair, just as her mother-in-law had said, and Eleanora thought it was a very good opportunity to talk to her husband. Domingo, Eleanora said gently, stepping onto the balcony. What's going on? I can't understand why you've started treating me like this. How else should I treat you? Domingo grumbled contemptuously. Well, during the time your mother has been staying with us, why haven't you tried to smooth things over between us, instead of taking sides? I don't think that's the right approach, Domingo. What's the right approach here, Eleanora? He looked at her as if he was about to yell. The right approach would have been to reconcile both sides, not take just one. I don't have anything against your mother, Domingo, but I feel like she hasn't been very kind to me. Yesterday, I was upset not because she said something wrong. I was upset because you didn't talk to me about it. It felt like you deceived me. You said she was coming for just a week, even though you knew she planned to live with us. So what? Her husband snapped. Maybe I didn't want to upset you. But you should have known I would be upset sooner or later. I would have found out anyway that she planned to live with us. Domingo, such decisions shouldn't be made alone. We're husband and wife, and we should have discussed this before agreeing to have her stay with us. What's the problem then? Domingo frowned. You yourself said you don't mind my mother being here. So what's the problem with her staying with us? At the very least, Domingo, the problem is that you didn't warn me about it in advance. And another problem is that even if I don't mind your mother, I feel like she minds me. I don't know why she dislikes me, but I see it. So everything was fine before she arrived, and suddenly she doesn't like you? Is that it? Do you really expect me to believe that? I don't believe it. Before she came, everything was fine, even how we welcomed her. She talked very nicely with you, and you just sat there silently. It was clear you couldn't stand her. If I couldn't stand her, I would have been against her coming from the start when you told me she was only staying with us for a week. Domingo, she doesn't like me, and I still don't understand why you refuse to see that. You're suffering from this situation too. Look at yourself. You've been gloomy and tense for the past 2 days. So have you. I'm like this because I can't handle the pressure your mother puts on me. That's why I leave the house, why I lock myself in the bedroom. I tried to sit next to her all day today. She didn't even say a word to me. Both of you act like I'm not here, and I feel like I'm the extra person in this apartment. Domingo didn't respond. He sighed heavily and covered his face with his hands. He sat like that for about 15 minutes while Eleanora waited for him to say something in response. I need to think about this, he said, not removing his hands from his face. Please go back inside the apartment. I just want to sit here alone and think about it. Eleanora didn't argue. She immediately understood that she had managed to influence her husband at least a little, and he was already beginning to doubt his decision in favor of Senora Lavina. It seemed she had done everything right, and that couldn't help but please her. An hour and a half later, she heard her phone vibrating in the pocket of her jeans. She had intentionally set it to silent mode so that no one would suspect anything. As soon as she retrieved her phone, she saw it was Tobias calling. Quietly rising from the couch, she retreated to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. "Hello," she said softly. "Tobias, hello. Are you approaching already?" "Yes." "Where should I go?" "Please give me the address," he replied. "Avenida Suecia, House 63, Apartment 136. It's the third entrance." "Okay, thank you," the man responded and coughed again. "Did you buy the flowers?" "Of course, I did," Tobias exclaimed, then coughed once more. "I also put on a suit to look more presentable. Do you think I did everything right?" "Absolutely, it will look even more romantic. Please hurry. By the way, if everything goes as planned, you might have to wait a bit." "Wait for what else?" the man asked in surprise. "Until Senora Lavina gathers all her things. I think everything will work out for you. Just one small request from me, please don't tell her that I helped you. Present it as if you found out our address on your own and came to pick her up." "Got it," Tobias cheerfully exclaimed. "Then wait for me. I remember where this street is. It's in the new construction area, right?" "Yes, that's correct. Please hurry up." 30 minutes later, Tobias arrived at the building. He called Eleanora again, and she once more excused herself to the bedroom to answer. He asked her for the best approach, and she suggested he find the apartment and ring the bell himself. They agreed to stage a little scene. Eleanora would open the door and then call Senora Lavina. The idea sounded very appealing and should work. Exiting the bedroom after speaking with Tobias, Eleanora saw Domingo still sitting on the couch in front of the television next to his mother. This played into her hands. She walked into the kitchen and waited for Tobias to find the apartment and ring the bell. The kitchen was closer to the hallway than the living room, giving her a perfect opportunity to reach the door before Domingo could. She wasn't worried at all about her husband's potential reaction to Tobias' obvious display of affection towards his mother. Let him worry, she thought. It didn't concern her at all. She understood that if Senora Lavina were to leave their apartment now, it would work in favor of the newlyweds, overriding any concerns Domingo might have. Just 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and Eleanora hurried to answer it. Peering through the peephole, she saw an elderly man around 60, holding flowers, dressed in a vintage pinstriped suit. She quickly opened the door and feigned ignorance. "Hello," she said, surprised to see Tobias. "And who are you looking for?" Confusion appeared on Tobias' face, and Eleanora immediately caught on. She winked at him, and he got the message. "If I'm not mistaken, Senora Lavina is here. Could you please invite her out here?" "All right," Eleanora replied and went into the living room to inform her mother-in-law about the visitor. "Senora Lavina, someone is looking for you." "What's going on?" Senora Lavina asked indignantly. Who's looking for me? This is your home. How would anyone know I'm here? Senora Lavina's scandalous behavior left Eleanora stunned, but she managed to keep her composure. I don't know, some man came, said he's looking for you, asked you to come out to the hallway so he could see you. Heavens! Senora Lavina exclaimed in displeasure, getting up from the couch. There's no peace in this house. What kind of family are you? What kind of family are we? Eleanora thought to herself, cursing inwardly. As Senora Lavina passed by her, Eleanora followed her back to the hallway, crossing her fingers, hoping everything would go as planned. Hello, Tobias exclaimed as soon as Lavina appeared in the hallway. Lavina, I've come for you. Seeing Tobias, the pensioner gasped and clutched her heart. She clearly didn't expect to see him there. Tobias, she exclaimed, and he produced the flowers he had hidden behind his back. Tobias, what are you doing here? I found out you went to visit the children, and I realized I couldn't bear to be apart from you. Tobias, I've come to take you home. Shall we? The pensioner's eyes widened, and she clutched her heart again. Tobias, she exclaimed and threw herself into his arms. Oh God, you're such a sweetheart, Tobias. At that moment, Domingo appeared in the hallway. Apparently, he had heard his mother's joyful exclamations from the living room and understood what was happening. His expression was extremely displeased, and Eleanora, seeing this, was even a little scared. If her husband intervened now, the whole plan could fail. So, are we going? Tobias asked when Lavina released him from her embrace. Of course, let's go, Tobias, she replied, almost in tears. My goodness, this is so sweet. I never thought someone could make me so happy at this age. Do you have enough gas to get there? Plenty, the man replied with a smile. Let's gather your things. Of course. Right now, the old woman replied and turned to enter back into the apartment, but Domingo stopped her. Mom, what's going on? He asked irritably. How did he even find out that you're here? Did you tell him? I swear to you, son, I haven't spoken to him at all, Senora Lavina said, crossing herself. I don't know how he found out I was here. That's it, let me through. I need to pack my things. Eleanora noticed from Domingo's expression that he strongly wanted to object, but either didn't do so or couldn't manage it. He was clearly very tense and irritated. When Eleanora's mother-in-law returned to the living room, her son, ensuring that she couldn't hear or see anything, approached Tobias with his hands in his pockets, his nose slightly upturned. What are you doing here, Senor Tobias? He asked, and Eleanora felt the tension in the air. I'm here to take your mom home, Domingo, Tobias smiled and replied casually, trying to ease the conflict. What, don't you like the idea? I don't like it at all, Domingo replied, squinting. Maybe you should turn around and go home before it's too late. Eleanora understood that her husband was not in a reasonable state right now. She approached Tobias, grabbed his hand, and said loudly, Oh, maybe you could help Lavina pack her things so you don't have to wait for her for so long? Come on in. You don't need to take your shoes off. Tobias entered the apartment. Domingo, staring intently at his mother's suitor, fell silent again. With the help of her, if you could call him that, admirer, Lavina packed all her belongings twice as quickly. 2 large bags were fully packed in just 20 minutes. Tobias helped carry them to the car. Dissatisfied, Domingo and his wife accompanied Senora Lavina as they left. Mom, when you arrive, please give me a call, Domingo said, casting a disdainful glance at Tobias. I'll be worried. Sure, son, his mother cheerfully replied, not taking her eyes off her neighbor. Okay, let's go. You don't have to wait for her, Tobias exclaimed, getting behind the wheel of his car. I think she's leaving you for good. At least, I really hope so. Tobias, you're such a romantic, Lavina chuckled, waving her hand. The neighbor started the car, and they drove off together with Lavina heading back home. To Eleanora's relief, her mother-in-law had no intention of returning. Tobias did everything to make sure she stayed, showering her with gifts and attention. It also took Eleanora about a week to convince her husband that his mother was an adult who could make her own choices, and that Senor Tobias was also a decent man whom he had known since childhood, so there was no need for jealousy or worry. The Valena family relationships were restored, and Lavina was now occupied with her personal life. Eleanora and Domingo's marriage was once again becoming happy.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie. making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.